Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. We are running one page behind on the Dirshu schedule. I will endeavor to catch up. Maybe I'll say an extra share on Friday in order to catch up. But today I have a double challenge. One is that the Mishnah Berurah that we have to do today, Mishnah Berurah is cut in Yud Gimel here on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, is a complex Mishnah Berurah, and I'm a little bit challenged for time today. So I'm going to say share today, Mirz Hashem, on Sif Dalid. Not going to complete, I don't think I'm going to complete the entire Sif Dalid. We'll see, maybe we will, but let's get going. So we're continuing to learn Hilchas Kriyas Sefer Torah. Who would have thought that the halachas of laning are quite this complex? We're discussing various requirements for Kriyas HaTorah, for laning, and various mistakes that come up and how you fix them. So, in that theme, we turn now to the top line of Chaf Amud Aleph, Hilchas Kriyas Sefer Torah, Siman Kuf Lamed Zayin Sif Daled. We have learned already that every aliyah has to have a minimum of 2 psukim. We're going to see that if you lane less than 2 psukim for an aliyah, that aliyah is loy nechshav leklum. That aliyah does not count. Now, when I say that aliyah does not count, that has multiple implications. One implication is that the aliyah does not count towards the minimum amount of aliyahs that you need. So during the week you need 3 aliyahs. If one of the aliyahs, the oila, or according to our meaning, the balkaire, laned less than 2 psukim, that aliyah doesn't count to the count of 3 aliyahs. If it's on Shabbos, it doesn't count to the count of 7 aliyahs. If it's on Yom Tov, it doesn't count towards the 5 necessary aliyahs. But then there's another problem. And that problem is that since the aliyah does not count, the 2 psukim that were laned for that aliyah, it's as if they were never laned. Now, during the week, that's not necessarily such a problem, because as we have seen time and time again over the last several days, during the week, it doesn't really matter what you lane. And that's why we saw in yesterday's shir that if the Balkari skips psukim, it's not necessarily a problem during the week. It only becomes a problem if by virtue of the fact that you skipped psukim, you don't have the requisite number of psukim laned. But as far as the psukim themselves, the psukim are not so critical. But we saw that on Shabbos every single pasuk is critical. So like I keep on saying, this week happens to be Parshas Nasai, we must lane every pasuk of Parshas Nasai. But now we're saying something else. Not only must we lane every pasuk of Parshas Nasai, every pasuk of Parshas Nasai must be laned in the context of a proper aliyah. So it's not enough just to have the Balkari actually read the psukim from the Sefer Torah. The psukim have to be read from the Sefer Torah in the context and in the format of an acceptable aliyah. What makes it acceptable aliyah? Well, you need 2 brachas. You need the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu first, the bracha of Asher Nasa Lanu Tarasem second, and it has to have a minimum of 3 psukim. If you have less than 3 psukim, not an aliyah. So it's very nice that you lay in the psukim, doesn't count. So against that backdrop, let's see Sif Daled. Says the Mechaber, Im kara echad shnei psukim. If one of the oilim, and again, the Mechaber is talking in the world of the Mechaber, where the oilim, the ones who had the aliyahs, actually did the laning. That's not our minig. Our minig is we have the Balkare doing the laning. But, says the Mechaber, Im kara echad shnei psukim, if one of the oilim only laned 2 psukim, instead of laning 3 psukim, or according to our minig, if in one of the aliyahs the Balkare only laned 2 psukim, he didn't make the minimum number of 3, tzarich lachzar v'likros. You got to go back and you got to lane those psukim over again. You have to do the aliyah over again. The aliyah does not count. Okay, let's pause over here. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah's cut in Yud Beis. Shnei psukim. We're talking over here. What happened? The Balkare or the Oile only laned 2 psukim. He didn't make the requisite number of 3. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Af shebein hakoil karu asar psukim. We're talking now Monday, Thursday, or Shabbos afternoon language, where the minimum amount of psukim that you need in total for the entire kriya is 10. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if for one of the aliyahs you only had 2 psukim, Af shebein hakoil karu asar psukim, even though over the entirety of the laning you met the requisite number of 10 psukim, Kigoin, for example, Sheshnaim Shalafanov Karu Arba. Let's say you called up the Kayin, and the Kayin laned 4 psukim, or the Balkaire laned for Kayin 4 psukim. Then you called up the Levi, and for the Levi, the Balkaire laned 4 psukim. So far you've got 8 psukim, and you've got 2 bona fide aliyahs. You've got 2 aliyahs that each have 4 psukim. Now you called up the Yisrael, and for the Yisrael, they only laned 2 psukim. So you have a total of 10. You have the requisite number of 10 psukim for the total kriya. But the last oila only had 2 psukim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even in that case, afilu hachi, even though you have the requisite number of 10 for the entire kriya, tzarech lachzar v'likrais, you've got to lane over again. Why? De'ein, and this is the key phrase, De'ein kriya chashuva b'pachas mishloisha psukim. Because a laning is not a laning. And note what the Chavetz Chaim says. The Chavetz Chaim chose his words very carefully. The Chavetz Chaim does not say De'ein aliyah chashuva b'pachas mishloisha psukim. He doesn't say that an aliyah is not an aliyah if it doesn't have 3 psukim. He says De'ein kriya chashuva b'pachas mishloisha psukim. If you have less than 3 psukim in an aliyah, the kriya is not a kriya. It's as if you never laned those psukim. The Kosav Taz, and the Taz says, now let's pause here for 1 second. So what's the Mechaber telling me? The Mechaber is telling me, and let's use the case that the Mishnah Berurah just gave me. You called up the Kayin laned 4 psukim. You called up the Levi laned 4 psukim. You've got 8 psukim so far. You called up the Yisrael said, Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMavorach, he made the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu, the Balkaire laned 2 psukim, and now the Yisrael makes the second bracha of the Aliyah, Asher Nasal on Torah Seves V'chai Olam Nata B'Zeichenu Baruch Atah Hashem Neisen HaTorah. What do you have to do? Well, this Aliyah didn't count. So he's got to do over. The Yisrael will make a new Aliyah. He'll say Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMavorach, and he'll make a new Aliyah. The Kosav Taz, the Taz says, Tehu adin b'shachris b'Shabbos. So too, let's say it's Shabbos morning. Af achar shekaru shiva kruim kadin. Let's say what you did on Shabbos was, you called up a Kayin, and you had a perfect Aliyah, more than 3 psukim. You called up a Levi, you had a perfect Aliyah, more than 3 psukim. You did Kayin, Levi, Shlishi, Revi, Chamishi, Shishi, Shvi. You called up 7 Aliyahs, and every one of the 7 Aliyahs was perfect. But you didn't use the order given in the Chumash. You made 7 Aliyahs out of less than the whole Parsha. Now, each Aliyah was fine. Each Aliyah had a minimum of 3 psukim. So where are you holding right now? You're not yet at the end of the Parsha. You didn't finish the Parsha yet. But you were already Mekayim the Chiyuv of 7 Aliyahs. Now, you still didn't finish the Parsha. So you call up an Achron. Now you call up the Achron, and the Achron, the Balkaire only lanes 2 Aliyahs for the Achron. Says the Taz, this is what the Taz is talking about. The Kosav Taz, Duadin b'Shachris b'Shabbos. Let's say you're doing laning by Shachris on Shabbos. Af achar shekaru shiva krum kadin. You already had 7 completely proper Aliyahs, but you didn't yet finish the Parsha. Im ira shekara echad achar zeh shnei psukim. If now you called up an Achron, and the Achron only laned 2 psukim, nami chayzer mehaytayim shekasavnu. That Aliyah also has to be redone. You know why that Aliyah has to be redone? Because what I said at the outset, it's very nice that you have 7 aliyahs, but the psukim that the acher laned, or that the Balkaira laned for the achron, those psukim don't count as part of the laning. Why? Because it's very nice that the Balkaira laned them, and he got all the trop right and everything else, but they were not laned in the context and in the format of a proper aliyah. So they don't count. Now it's as if those psukim were skipped. And on Shabbos, you cannot skip psukim. Because at Shabbos, it's chayvas hayayim, we have to hear every single pasuk. Okay. Ois cotton gimel, tzarich lachzor v'likros. All right, so again, what's our scenario? Now, our scenario so far, and it's very clear that in Sif Dalid, the Mechaber is talking in Sif Dalid the language of Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos afternoon. He's not talking the language of Shabbos day, because if you look at the Mechaber says, Im kara echad shnei psukim tzarich lachzor v'likros, ve'im loy karu bein shloshtan elitisha psukim. If during the 3 aliyahs you only got 9 psukim, when do you have 3 aliyahs? Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos afternoon. So here in Sif Dalid, the Mechaber is speaking the language of Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos afternoon. He's not speaking the language of Shabbos day. So what do we have from the Mechaber so far? In this first halach of the Mechaber, what we have so far is, if one of the aliyahs during the week, if one of the aliyahs on Monday and Thursday, or Shabbos afternoon, was a flawed aliyah, because it only had 2 psukim, you got to do a do-over. It doesn't count. What do you mean it doesn't count? Well, first of all, you don't have 3 aliyahs, because this aliyah doesn't count, so you don't have 3 aliyahs. The other thing is, you might not have the requisite amount of psukim. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe because this aliyah doesn't count, maybe now you have less than 9 psukim, or less than 10 psukim. Maybe you only have 6 psukim. So that would be another problem. So now, says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said, what do you got to do? Tzarich lachzor v'likros. You got to do a do-over. What does the do-over mean? Practically speaking, what do you do? How do you handle this situation? And now we're going to have a complex Mishnah Berurah over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you're telling me that you got to do the aliyah over again. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ule'inyan bracha lefaneha, as far as the opening bracha of the aliyah, kach dinoi. This is the halacha. What does the Mishnah Berurah mean? Well, let's give a simple case. Okay? You called up the Kohen. The Kohen laned 3 psukim. No problem. You called up the Levi. The Levi laned 3 psukim. No problem. Now you call up the Yisrael. The Yisrael says, Baruch Hashem HaMavarach, Baruch Hashem HaMavarach Le'olam Vayet. He makes the opening bracha of Hashabach Banu. He lanes, and he only lanes 2 psukim. Okay? Now, the Balkaira laned 2 psukim, and the Balkaira stopped. Okay? What do we do now? The Oila has not yet made the second bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Im adayin loy beirach bracha achrayna. If the Oila did not yet make the second bracha. So what happened? He made the opening Baruch Hu, he made the opening Hashabach Habanu, the Balkairi laned 2 psukim, and now the Balkairi stopped, and he rolled the Sefer Torah closed, and he's waiting for the Oila to make the second bracha. And now somebody realizes, hey, wait a second, you only laned 2 psukim. That's where we're holding. In that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, Afal Pisha Kfar Galal Sefer Torah, even though you already rolled the Sefer Torah closed, V'haya B'daitoi Levarech, and the Oila already had in mind that he's ready to make the second bracha, the bracha of Hashem Nasa Lav Torah Semes. So what the Mishnah Berurah is pointing out, it's kind of like you were already totally Mesiach Das from the Aliyah, right? Again, the Oila made the Baruch Hu, he made the first bracha, the Balkara laned 2 psukim, and now they rolled the Sefer Torah closed. And now the Oila is about to say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Nasa Lav Torah Semes. So he was already like Mesiach Das from the whole Aliyah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even so, Aval Bishakvar Galal Sefer Torah V'haya B'daitoi Levarech V'nizkaru Shaloi Kara Rak Shnei Psukim, and now they realize that they only laned 2 psukim. Chayzer V'kairei B'loi Bracha Lefaneha. You open up the Sefer Torah and you lane another pasuk. You don't need a new bracha of Hashabach Habanu. Just, we goofed. We have to lane another pasuk. Fine. Open the Sefer Torah and let the Balkar lane another pasuk. And then you'll make the bracha. That's simple. Aval, however, im kfar beirach bracha achroina, what do you do if the oila already made the second bracha? He already said, what do you do now? Says the Mishnah Berurah, aval im kfar beirach bracha achroina, if you already made the second bracha of the aliyah, nistalka kriya harishayna legamri. Now, the laning of the two psukim, it's gone, it's done, it's finished. It's dead and buried. It's gone. Because it's over. And it didn't count. So v'lachein, and therefore, tzarech lachzar, you got to do over, ulevarich lefaneha, and make a new opening bracha. You'll say, Baruch Hashem HaMavarech, Baruch Hashem HaMavarech L'Olam V'ed. You'll make a new bracha Asher Bacha Banu. Ulahaschil mimakom shehischil b'kriya hakodemes. You'll go back to the beginning of that aliyah. Ki kriya shnei psukim elu lo yalu klal. Because this laning didn't count. It's as if it never happened. The laning didn't count, the aliyah didn't count, nothing counted. So again, what happened over here? Kayin, fine. Levi, fine. Yisrael, Baruch Hashem HaMavarech, Baruch Hashem HaMavarech L'Olam V'ed, Asher Bacha Banu, the Balkari laned 2 psukim, only 2. The Oila, the Yisrael, made the second bracha of the Aliyah. Baruch Atah Hashem Noisen HaTorah. Now somebody comes running up. What are you doing? You only laying 2 psukim. What do? You go back to the beginning of that Aliyah, and the Yisrael starts over again. Baruch Hashem HaMavarech, Baruch Hashem HaMavarech L'Olam V'ed, Asher Bacha Banu, and now laying the aliyah properly with a minimum of 3 psukim. Ki kriyas shnei psukim elu lo yalu klal. V'oid pasuk echad imai, and of course he's going to relane the 2 psukim that he already laned, and he's going to have to add a pasuk kedei lahashlim shlosh psukim, so that you should have the requisite 3 psukim. V'em hashtayim shalofanav loy karu rak shloisha shloisha. And if you're talking about a scenario where the Kohen only laned 3 psukim and the Levi only laned 3 psukim, so now you're only holding by 6 psukim, tzarechul hashlim ad arba psukim. Then the Yisrael has to lay in a total of 4 psukim, kedei sheyeh b'tzeiruf asar psukim, so that between the Kohen and the Levi and the Yisrael, you have the minimum requisite number of psukim for the laning, which is 10. Okay, next scenario. Va'afilu im kvar karu le'echad ha'oila achrav va'ola lateva. Okay, now we get a little bit more complicated. And I'm going to give you a heads up just based on what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say later. Let's imagine the following scenario. It's a Monday. There's no Kaihanim. So all 3 aliyahs are Yisraelim. So you called up the first Yisrael, and the first Yisrael laying the beautiful aliyah. He had 3 psukim, 4 psukim, 5 psukim, whatever's printed in the siddur. The first Yisrael, the Rishon, was a perfect aliyah. Now you called up the Sheni. It's not a Levi. I mean, it could be a Levi theoretically, but you didn't have a Kayin, so it could be a Yisrael. You called up the Sheni. And the Sheni only lanes 2 psukim. And he completes his whole aliyah. He did the opening brachas of the aliyah, the Balkari lane 2 psukim. He did the closing bracha of the aliyah. So if we would stop right there, we already know what the halach is. The halach is do over. Start the aliyah all over again. Baruch Hashem HaMavarech, Baruch Hashem HaMavarech L'Olam V'ed, Asher Bacha Banu. Fix the mistake, lane 3 psukim, make the closing bracha, and then move on. That's what the halacha would be. But now something else happened. You had the first aliyah, the Rishon. You had the second aliyah, the Sheni, which is a defective aliyah, and now they already called up the Shlishi. So now the Shlishi is already up here by the bima. Oh, says the Mishnah Berurah, if the one who's supposed to have the next aliyah already came up, okay. You know, I'm going to tweak the case a little bit. I'm sorry, but I'm going to tweak the case a little bit. Let's do it like this. The problem was in the Rishon. The Rishon only laned 2 psukim, and now you already called up the Sheni. What do you do now? You already called up the Sheni. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Va'afilu im kvar karu le'echad ha'oila achrav. Even if you already called up the next aliyah, va'ola la teva, and the person for the next aliyah already came up to the bima. What should you do? Yamoid sham oiseya acher, the second aliyah who was already called up should stand there by the bima, ad sheyevarech zeh shenis, until the first aliyah does the do-over, v'yikra shloisha psukim, and lanes 3 psukim properly, v'chanal, v'yevarech la'acharav, and makes the closing bracha of his aliyah, v'achakach yikra zeh she'al acharav, and then the one who came up for the second aliyah will have his aliyah. Now we get more complicated. V'im kvar hiskel hasheni levarich. What if the next aliyah already made the first bracha of his aliyah? Oh, so what's the case? You called up the Rishon. Again, there's no kohen. You called up the Rishon. The Rishon came up and he only laned 2 psukim, but he finished his aliyah. He made the bracha of Asher Nasal Tarsam Zachai Lom Natam Zechenu. He finished his aliyah. You called up the Sheni, but not only did you call up the Sheni, you see, if you still caught your mistake now, you're still good. The first aliyah, the Rishon, will do a do-over. He'll do his aliyah over again. But what happened now is you still didn't catch the mistake. And the one who you called up for Sheni, he said, Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMavorach, and he already made the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu. Or he at least already said the shame. He said Baruch Atah Hashem of the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu. Oh boy, now you have a problem. What are you going to do now? You can't interrupt the second person's aliyah and say, oh, stop. We have to have the first guy do a do-over. He already said Hashem's name on the bracha of his aliyah. What are you going to do now? Says the Mishnah Berurah, let's think this through. If the oiler for the second aliyah already started his bracha, which means he said Baruch Atah Hashem of the bracha of Hashem Bachar Banu, not Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMavorach. That doesn't constitute have already starting the brachas. Oy shesiyim kol bracha, or we finished the entire bracha of Hashem Bachar Banu. V'nizkeru. And now you realize that the first aliyah was a flawed aliyah because it only had 2 psukim. Oh, what do? Yesh loy lahaskel mimokim shehiskel zeh shalafanov. The second aliyah, the Balkare should go back all the way to the beginning. He should go back to where the first aliyah was supposed to start. Dahainu af shnei psukim hakoidmin, meaning even the first 2 psukim. V'yasayim oid pasuk, v'yavarach lachareha, add on a 3rd pasuk to make it a proper aliyah, make the closing bracha of the aliyah. V'yeshoymim shel milavad shnei psukim hakoidmin yikra oid shloisha psukim. There are those that say you should later another 3 psukim. I'm not going into that. V'harishoyn yamoid shamat sheyigmar zeh, the first oiler who had the mistaken aliyah, where they didn't lane 3 psukim, he should stay there by the bima. Now you'll give the second aliyah to the first oiler, and he'll continue from where the first aliyah left off. Oh, let's simplify this. What did the Mishnah Berurah just say? What the Chaim just said was like this. Again, I'm going to go through both scenarios. He's saying like this. Again, in our case, where we're talking, let's say, on a Monday and there's no Kohanim. So you have Yisrael, and Yisrael. You see, it's going to get more complicated when we have a Kohen. So right now we're talking about we don't have a Kohen. You have 3 Yisraelim on a Monday. So the first 2 scenarios that we've tackled so far is, the first scenario is the opening aliyah, the Rishon, he made the first bracha of the aliyah, then the Balkare laned, and he only laned 2 psukim. When did you catch the mistake? If you caught the mistake after you already closed the Sefer Torah, but before he made the second bracha of the aliyah, no problem. Open up the Sefer Torah, lane the 3rd pasuk, then close it, make the second bracha of the aliyah, and go on. Everything is fine, despite the fact that you were already Mesiach Das from the aliyah, it's still fine. Okay, next scenario, a little bit more complicated. You had the first aliyah, And the first oila, not only did they close the Sefer Torah, he already made the second bracha of the Aliyah. He really closed the Aliyah out. Oh, so now tzarich lachzor v'likros. Now you got to do a do-over. What does a do-over mean? What does a do-over look like? Very simple. Do it over again. Pshutei kamashmai. The one who had the first Aliyah will start again from the top. Baruch Hu es Hashem ha'mavayrach. Make the bracha v'Hashem banu. The Baal Koreh will start from the beginning and do the Aliyah the right way. And do at least 3 psukim. And then the first oila will make the second bracha, shenasal teres emes. Fine, no problem. Okay, third scenario. You called up the first oila. He did his whole aliyah, only with 2 psukim. He already finished the aliyah with the second bracha, and now you already called up the second oila. So the second oila is already standing there by the bima. Okay, no problem. The first oila will do a do-over, and then the second oila will have the second aliyah, right? That's what we said. Just checking. Yeah. Now we get to the fourth scenario, which is the most complicated so far. The first aliyah was a defective aliyah. They only did 2 psukim and they did both brachas. Now you already called up the second oila. Not only did you already call up the second oila already made the first bracha of his aliyah. What do you do now? So, says the Chavetz Chaim, simple. You know what you do now? The second oila is going to become the first oila. How? We throw the first aliyah out the window. The first aliyah is as if it never happened. The second oila, who already made the first bracha of his aliyah, the Baal Koreh will start from the beginning and lane the aliyah that's appropriate for the first aliyah. And then the second oila will make the second bracha of the aliyah. So his aliyah became the first aliyah. Now, call up the individual who was supposed to have the first aliyah, where they messed up, give him what is now the second aliyah. Okay. Now says the Mishnah Berurah weiter. Okay, how about, let's add another knech. V'im harishon yarad kfar me'ateva. Let's say the first oila, right? The first oila already walked away. The first oila, you gave him the first aliyah. The first aliyah was defective. You called up the second aliyah. The second aliyah, he went ahead and he made the first bracha. Now you caught the mistake. So you turned the second aliyah into the first aliyah. If the guy from the first aliyah is still standing by the bima, so now you'll give him the next aliyah, which is now going to be the second aliyah. Even though factually it's the third, but the first one didn't count. You're going to give him the second aliyah. But what if he already walked away? You didn't catch the mistake until he was already gone. In that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, Vim harishon yarad kfar me'ateva. If the first oil already left the bima, v'achakach niskaru, and now you remembered, you don't have to call him back. You could call up another guy. You don't have to call up Badafka that guy. You could call up another guy. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, Bamed dvarim amurim. Everything that I said until now, when is this true? And this is where I told you, I gave you a heads up, and I told you that all the cases that we're talking about now were all where we had 3 Yisraelim. We didn't mix a Kayin and a Levi into the mix. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, Bamed dvarim amurim. When is everything that I just said? B'shaloi hayikayin bebeis hamedrash, when you didn't have a Kayin, v'karu Yisraelim, and all the aliyahs were Yisraelim. Avalim kara zeh b'kayin, but if this disaster happened with a Kayin, shekara rak shnei psukim, that the Kayin only laned 2 psukim. Okay, so now you have a Monday, and you have a regular scenario where you have a Kayin. You called up the Kayin. The Kayin started his aliyah. He only laned 2 psukim. He closed his aliyah with the second bracha. And now the Levi... Okay, what would you do right now if you caught your mistake right now? The Kayin finished off his aliyah with the second bracha. What would you do right now? No problem. You would do a do-over. You do Kayin over again. You tell the same Kayin, make another aliyah. Your first aliyah didn't count. Start again from the top. The Kayin will start a new aliyah. Baruch Hashem HaMavarech. The Baal Koreh will start from the beginning of the Kriya. No problem. But what if the Levi already made the opening bracha of his aliyah? So the Kayin had his aliyah, but his aliyah only had 2 psukim. He finished his aliyah. You called up the Levi. The Levi made the first bracha of his aliyah. What are you going to do now? Why is this a problem? I'll tell you why it's a problem. What do you want the Levi to do? If this happened with 2 Yisraelim, so we said the second aliyah will go back to the top. He'll lane all the way from the beginning. His aliyah will become the first aliyah, and then you'll give the Yisrael who had the first aliyah the second aliyah. But now you can't do this. You can't do it for multiple reasons. First of all, what are you going to do? You're going to have the Levi lane from the top. You're going to have the Baal Koreh start the Kriya over again from the top for a Levi. That means that by the Levi, the Baal Koreh is going to be laning the psukim that belong to a Kayin. That's a pagam to the Kohanim. Can't do it. It's a pagam to the Kohanim. Second of all, you know what else you can't do? You can't call the Kayin and give the Kayin the second aliyah because you can't give the Kayin an aliyah after a Levi. So now what do? So says the Mishnah Berurah like this. Avalim karazeh b'Kayin. If this kerfuffle happens with a Kayin thrown into the mix, shekara rak shnei psukim, with the Baal Koreh only laying 2 psukim for the Kayin, and now you already called up the Levi, and the Levi already made the first bracha of his aliyah. And now you realize that by Kayin they made a mistake. And they only laid 2 psukim. The Levi, the Baal Koreh, can't start the Kriya from the top. He can't go back to the Kriya Satira, to the beginning of Kriya Satira. He can only start from after where the Kayin was supposed to finish. V'yikra mikanu lahalon shloisha psukim, and lane from there forward 3 psukim. V'lo yikra shnei psukim arishonim shekar HaKayin. He cannot lane. He can't repeat the 2 psukim that the Kayin already laned. And I'm going to skip the brackets for a moment. Why? Because if the Baal Koreh is going to go over again the 2 psukim that he already did by the first Kayin, that's going to be a pagam to the Kohanim. Those are Kayin psukim. They're not Levi psukim. You can't do that. So what do? I'm going to give you a scenario from Parshas Nosai, from this week's Parsha. Monday, Thursday, tomorrow's Kriya. You call up the Kayin Krav Yamoid. You call up the Kayin, and he makes his first bracha. The Baal Koreh lanes. Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemar Nasa Yisraish Bnei Gershon Gamheim Leveis Haveisam Lemishpachaisam. And now the Kayin finishes off his aliyah. Asher Nasal Tersemes V'Chayilam Nata B'Zichenu. Baruch Atah Hashem Noisan HaTorah. Yamoid So and So Ben Tzayin Tzai Levi. The Levi comes up. Baruch Hashem HaMavarech. Asher Baruch Abon Mikol Ha'amim. Baruch Atah Hashem Noisan HaTorah. Then somebody says, hey, wait a second. For the Kayin, you only laid 2 aliyahs, 2 psukim. What are you going to do now? If you were talking about Yisraelim, so the Baal Koreh would go back to Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemar. He'd go back to the beginning of the Kriya. But now the Baal Koreh can't go back to the beginning of the Kriya. Because if he goes back to the beginning of the Kriya and he lanes over again Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemar and Nasa Yisroish B'nei Gershon Gamheim, that's a pagam to the Kohanim. You're laning the Kohanim's psukim for a Levi. So you can't do that. So you know what you'll do? What you'll do is the Levi is going to pick up from the 3rd pasuk of the Kriya. He's going to pick up from Miben Shloshim Shana V'Mala. He's going to pick up from there. He's going to make sure to lane 3 psukim. Then you're going to call up a Yisrael, and the Yisrael is going to make sure to lane 3 psukim. And then you're going to call up a 4th aliyah, another Yisrael, and that Yisrael is going to make sure to lane at least 3 psukim. Now what's going to be the problem? You missed the first 2 psukim of the Kriya Satira. You missed Pasuk Chav Aleph, Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemar, and Pasuk Chav Beis, Nasi Yisroish B'nei Gershon Gamheim Leveis Haveisam Lemishpachaisam. So what? We're talking about during the week. During the week, the individual psukim are not critical. So fine, so we don't have those 2 psukim. So what? Not a problem. Let's see it inside. So again, I'm going to go back to the where the ice cotton yud ches for the Shari Tzion is. Avalim kara zeh b'kayin shekara rak shnei psukim. If this kerfuffle happened by a kayin with about Kari only laying 2 psukim for the kayin, v'achakach berech halevi, and then you called up the Levi, and the Levi already made the first brach of his aliyah. V'az diskar shetah kayin v'loy kara rak shnei psukim, and then you realize that by kayin you only laying 2 psukim. Lo yaskel halevi ela mimakom shapasak hakayin. The Levi is going to have to pick up from where the kayin left off. V'yikra mikanu lahalon shloisha psukim. He'll have to go from there forward a minimum of 3 psukim. V'lo yikra shnei psukim arishonim shekara kayin. He cannot repeat the 2 psukim that the kayin already laid, because that would be a pgam to the kaihanim. Now I'll read the brackets, and this is not a problem that you're going to skip the first 2 psukim, because it's during the week. The b'choil kosher b'chisam aschal parsha. We're talking about during the week. So you skip the first 2 psukim of the laning. So what? The individual psukim are not critical during the week. They're only critical on Shabbos. Again, he can't go back to the beginning, because that would be a pgam to the kaihanim. V'achar Levi, after the Levi's aliyah, which is now really the first aliyah, Yikra Shnei Yisraelim, you'll call up another 2 Yisraelim, Lahashlim Minyan Akruim, to fill out the requisite number of 3 aliyahs. The EF Shalikre Kayin Arishain, you can't call the Kayin back. Remember, if the first 2 aliyahs would have been 2 Yisraelim because there were no Kayanim, so then the second Yisrael would become the first aliyah, and you would call back the first Yisrael to be the second aliyah. But now you can't do that. You already called a Levi. So once you already called a Levi, you can't call the first Kayin back and have him be the second aliyah. The EF Shalikra Kayin Arisha Shetach or Levi, you can't call him up after the Levi, Dein Kayin Kayriyach Levi. Because you can't call up a Kayin after a Levi. Ki Akriya Shekaru Shnei Psukim Command Lesadamya. And the reason for all of this is because the aliyah that was only comprised of 2 psukim doesn't count. The laning doesn't count at all. Now, V'im b'Shabbos will be Yom Tov Shachris. Now let's talk Shabbos language. V'im b'Shabbos will be Yom Tov Shachris. Shekaru le'echad min ha'olim shnei psukim uberach la'acharei v'nizkar shetah. Let's say this happened on Shabbos. You called up the Shlishi. The Shlishi only laned 2 psukim. He made the second brach of his aliyah already, and now you realize that he missed 2 psukim. Yesh oimrim, there are those that say, De bazeh toiv yoser sheshuv lo yikrahu ba'atzmai ela yikra acher. Till now we were saying that whenever you have a do-over, right? Again, let's take the Kohanim out of the picture. In our original scenarios where we were talking about 3 Yisraelim, we said if in the first aliyah they realized that they only had 2 psukim, so you do a do-over. So the Yisrael who had the first aliyah, who turned out to be a defective aliyah, do over, start again from the top. The same guy should say Baruch Hashem HaMavarech and do the aliyah over again. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, there are those that say that if this happened on Shabbos, so let's say the Shlishi only laned, the Balkara only laned 2 psukim, normally, where we're holding in the Mishnah Berurah, I would say, okay, it's a do-over. So the guy who you called up for Shlishi, his aliyah didn't count, take it again from the top. You called up Shimon ben Yaakov for Shlishi, you goofed, you only laned 2 psukim, his aliyah doesn't count, so again, he'll do it over again. And this time you'll do the aliyah right. He'll make new brachas, and you'll make sure to lay at least 3 psukim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yesh Oimrim, De bazeh toiv yoser sheshuv lo yikrahu ba'atzmai ela yikra acher. The same fellow shouldn't fix the mistake. You should call up a new guy. You should call up a new oiler. His aliyah was defective. Okay? He goes to the side of the bima. Maybe you'll make him a Mishnah Berurah, but he doesn't do the do-over. You call a new guy to do the do-over. Why? Explains the Mishnah Berurah in the brackets here. Because remember, we learned that during the week you're not allowed to make hisafas. During the week you have 3 aliyahs, no hisafas. So says the Mishnah Berurah, during the week when you're not allowed to make Kaisafis, we want the same oiler to fix the problem. Because in Kainim Yikru Acher Lahashlim Bimkaimai, because if you call up a different person to fix the problem, Mechzi Kamoisha Kara Bakruim. Now we see 4 people walk by the bima. It looks like you made 4 aliyahs on a Monday, and you're not allowed to make 4 aliyahs on the Monday. If the same guy does a do-over, it doesn't look like there were 4 aliyahs. But if you have another guy, it looks like there were 4 aliyahs. Masha Eken b'Shabbos to Mutalaisif. But on Shabbos, that's not a problem, because on Shabbos you're allowed to make Oisafis. So then, Yoset Tov Sheyikra Acher, then it's better to call up a different person to make the mistake. Mishayikra Oilazeh Shnei Pamim. That's better than having the same guy have 2 aliyahs. Shnei Pamim b'Sefer Tarach. Stay nochel lechatchila. Because it's not proper that one guy should have 2 aliyahs on the same Sefer Torah. Kimavur b'Siman Reish Pei Beis. V'yaskel mimakom shehiskel arishon v'chanal, and the new guy who's doing the do-over will start from where the defective aliyah before him was supposed to start from. V'yashlimu shiva kruim elvad zeh shekara shtei psukim, and you have to make sure that you have 7 aliyahs without the defective one. V'yesherim daf b'Shabbos ein tzarich likra la'acher, but there are those that say that even on Shabbos the same person could do the do-over, and you don't have to call somebody else. Okay, you can see why I said at the outside of the shir that we're going to stop over here. This is very complex. Mirza Hashem, next time we'll continue from the Imloi Karu Beit Shloshtan, the bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch. I will endeavor to try to make up for lost ground. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The source of Liman HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shem should send Yeshua's and Furs, Parnasset Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'Yisrael Tzedek B'mherav Yameinu. Amen. Be well.